So I want you all to think about, how are you moving at the beat of community? How do you center community in your work, right? As you're going through sessions, as you're talking to folks, to kind of keep having that in mind. For us, we must continue the work of our ancestors, and that work was of dreaming. When we think about the past, we are where we are because folks had really wild ideas and actually believed in them, but they were brave enough to dream. So I want us to think about that and continue those legacies, right? To make space for new visions, because without those new visions, we don't know what to build, only what's knocked down. So we want to make space for those ideas so we have a vision for what to create, what to move forward. So speaking of legacy and ancestors, we must acknowledge whose shoulders are we on. From the woman from storming Caesar's palace to the Bay Area's very own Black Panther Party, we know that historically, women have been at the forefront of civil rights movement and welfare rights, right? When we think about, why do we have the WIC program? Why do we have the food stamp program, right? That's all movement work, and it was women leading that. I know most of you all might probably know who Cesar Chavez is, but do you know who Dolores Huerta is? Right? Well, y'all do, but most folks don't, and that's not a coincidence. It's because I remember when I learned about Dolores Huerta, I was like, are you kidding me? I wasn't surprised because we know the truth. We know how feminine energy is and the divinity that it is. But I was shocked to say, why aren't we learning about Dolores Huerta? Why isn't she being taught about in schools, right? But it is our duty to uplift those narratives and uplift those words. Speaking about giving folks reverence, I want to give a reverence and thanks to all the women and femme that have paved the way for me to be here, right? I want to first give thanks to my Palestinian sister, Shafika, Free Palestine, and for allowing me to come into the Inca movement space. I want to give a special thanks to Mara for making space for me and kicking the door open and allowing me to be here. And I want to thank Stacy for, dreaming up big and believing in herself and making this happen, and also having me here. So just want to give y'all flowers and thank you again. So for us to understand where we're headed, we must look to lessons of the past. As y'all know, I like to time travel and I like to journey. So I would actually want to go ahead and welcome Saria Van Winkle, a communication strategist for organizations like the Bridge Project, the Maven Collaborative, and more, who will journey us through that history. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to call up some of my friends. Jhumpa Battacharya from the Maven Collaborative, Dr. Zaya Malawa from the Abundant Birth Project, and Kia Pollard from Jewish Family Service of San Diego.
Mic check. Yep.
Really? Okay.
All right. So, first, acknowledging we have a panel of Black and South Asian women. We are taking over. So I would love for you all to maybe just give a few beats on how you are involved in the guaranteed income space, and I will try and keep a hold of this.
Okay. What's up, y'all? Good morning. That was really sad. Good morning. Okay. I'm Jhumpa. I'm the co-president and co-founder of the Maven Collaborative, which centers race, gender, and joy in the pursuit of economic justice. And we do a lot of work. Guaranteed income is a policy that we believe in because it comes from Black women's visions and dreams, which we'll talk about in a moment. And we do a lot of connection to narrative change work within the guaranteed income movement. Because if you're doing guaranteed income work, you are doing narrative change work. And we'll get into that.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to welcome you to my city. My name is Zaya Malawa. I'm from San Francisco. I helped start the Abundant Birth Project, and I continue to lead it with a bunch of friends. And I'm just really, really thrilled that we get to have a conversation today and tomorrow about guaranteed income that's going to be rooted in equity and racial justice, because I think that's a conversation that we don't lean into enough in the guaranteed income community. So I'm excited that we get to fix it here today in my hometown.
Good morning. Good morning. This is such a beautiful room. It looks great from up here. You all look great. My name is Kia Pollard, and I am a director at Jewish Family Service of San Diego. And there I have the honor of running, designing, implementing several cash transfer and guaranteed income projects, one of which is my baby, called the Black Women's Resilience Project, focused on Black women caregivers in San Diego and providing them guaranteed income and community, building those connections with one another, right, in San Diego, because my business, Cafe X, is a cooperative. And I'm very, very passionate about building economic opportunity for our communities. So I'm excited about this conference. This is one heck of a kickoff to ground the conversation, so thank you.
So I think as we're thinking of this theme of meeting the moment, we really want to ground ourselves in the history. Where can we draw inspiration? What stories can we tell more accurately and more fully? And also, what lessons can we learn in terms of what to avoid and what we can do better in the future? So we are going to kick it off with a juicy question. There are a lot of people in the guaranteed income space who sometimes suffer from what I branded the I have a dream affliction, in which they rightly do acknowledge the work of MLK in the guaranteed income space, and also fail to acknowledge that MLK was brought to that work by a Black woman, Johnny Tillman, of the NWRO. So even when MLK is referenced, which is great, the yes and is missing, right? And the work of Black women is erased. And that is, unfortunately, something that is still happening to this day. So how do those of us in this room, in this space, acknowledge that and rectify it and make sure that Black women's contributions in the guaranteed income space, and I would say far beyond, are acknowledged both historically and currently?
You want to start? You want me to start? Go for it. I love this question. So first and foremost, like, how do we acknowledge Johnny Tillman? We say her name, right? Johnny Tillman. And we acknowledge that, yeah, Black women get erased in our history, in the present, and what we want to do is make sure that doesn't happen in the future. And so I think what this means in terms of, for all of y'all that are advocates for guaranteed income, we cannot ignore the needs, the hopes, the dreams, and the future of Black women in this work. So when we are doing guaranteed income pilots, that means we cannot ignore the racist, misogynistic, patriarchal narratives, values, stereotypes that underline all of our economic policies. And our work as a community needs to be that of flipping those narratives on their heads, right? Of actually making sure that when we are fighting for something, when we're fighting for a guaranteed income policy, we include Black women. And not just include them like, oh, they're at the table, cool, but include, like, what are their hopes? What are their dreams? What do they want? What do they need? And that's how we should be designing our policies. And not just assume that one boat lifts all tides, or one tide lifts all boats. I'll get it right. Okay, one tide lifts all boats. But we have to be very specific, right? And we have to acknowledge that when we center Black women's humanity, we are actually centering all of our humanities. We need to see ourselves within Black women.
Okay. Hi. I think one of the things that is challenging sometimes in doing guaranteed income work for me is that I personally have seen some amazing Black women and Black femme-identified folks doing some of the vanguard work. And yet, when we see a lot of guaranteed income wins, Black women are not necessarily benefiting from the wins. And this has also been the case when we look at other social service safety network that's happened in this country. And so I think that part of what I think should be happening is that we make sure that Black women and frankly Indigenous women in this country are always the prime beneficiaries of this work. I think that's how we start to rectify this. But I also think that this is kind of how we create equity in this country. I can say, being from San Francisco, that in 2020, probably there was only 1 out of every 6 households who did not have a Black Lives Matter sign in their window. But what does it mean to actually translate Black lives actually mattering? Like, what does that work look like? And what I can say from my personal experience in the guaranteed income space is that there's going to be a lot of extra barriers if you're trying to center Black or Indigenous folks in the work, because we live in a deeply racist country that has never wanted to see Black moms thrive and has never wanted to see Indigenous moms thrive. And so if we want to center these groups, these mamas, our mamas, it means that we're going to have to be willing to take on a different level of hard work. But the benefit of taking on this hard work is that we're creating liberation in a number of other spaces, right? If we're able to take on the challenge of figuring out how to direct our resources to the groups that need it the most in guaranteed income spaces, we can do equity work in other spaces also. And so I think all of our liberation depends on our ability to center these groups, not only because it's the ethical thing to do, because so many Black and Indigenous women have led the pathway to freedom for all of us, but also because the further path to freedom relies on us centering these mamas going forward. Thanks.
I'm gonna add like 2 sentences to that. I echo those sentiments. I think one of the things that I am most energized by is the ability to do work in the field. It's one of my truest loves, in addition to the theory, in addition to the history and the conceptual understanding about what it means to build community. We acknowledge the history of these women by understanding the patterns, right? The things that they left behind, and understanding them not only from a theoretical standpoint. You know, it's really nice to say that we want equity. It's really nice to say that we want care, right? But what does it mean to actually practice that? And what does it look like on the ground to do that, not only with Black women, but women of all colors, of all ethnicities, you know, in multitude of communities around the country? That's, to me, in practice, what it looks like to acknowledge those women. And after you're done saying their name, right, after you're done talking about the disastrous economic policy, we have to then practice. And that's what I intend, and that's what some of the programming needs to focus on, I think, moving forward. These new models of work that provide the foundation, right? The income is the foundation, but that social, that communal energy, right, behind these movements is equally important to what we're talking about when we think about these theoretical, right, the macro level things. We have to really get into the nitty-gritty, right? Like these women did. They did it on the ground, and they left a trail for us, right? So bringing that into this century, you know, and talking about it within the context of this global economy is really, really important.
Okay, so let's talk about the here and now. It is impossible to deny that Black women are still at the forefront of this movement, from the first guaranteed income program payments to be distributed, which I'm also going to correct the record because a lot of people in the space get it wrong. It was Magnolia Mothers Trust from Jackson, Mississippi in December of 2018. You can, fact check that. That is correct. To Zaya's program, giving cash to Black and brown mothers to Kia's program, Melody's program, Hope's program, to name just a few. Yet, when these big stories come out and the New York Times is looking for somebody to call, the first people on their speed dial are generally from white-led organizations. So, a multi-part question. How does this lack of representation harm not only the women who are involved, but our efforts as a whole?
Well, I can say that one of the things that is the hardest part of guaranteed income work, I'm sure all y'all know this, is fundraising. And I think that one of the impacts of kind of being invisibilized in the guaranteed income movement is that you're also invisibilized to funders. I think kind of stepping back from that, personally, I've experienced a lot of anti-Blackness when I'm trying to fundraise. I think it's hard sometimes for big funders to trust me as a Black woman to distribute their money, and furthermore, to trust the Black women that I plan to distribute it to quote-unquote use it correctly. And so the layers of anti-Blackness when it comes to fundraising, I think, are compounded when we're invisibilized as the leaders, the founders, the drivers of this kind of work. And I think that if we had a little bit more visibility, if people understood what it took to lift up a Black-centered guaranteed income program, it would be easier to understand why you can trust and believe in our leadership. So I agree. Please give Aisha the money, because she's doing the thing, and she's doing it the hard way.
Well, I think it's also seeing her as an expert, right? And seeing the participants as experts. I think that's the thing. When reporters are looking for someone, there is a narrative in this country on who is an expert and who is not. And it's generally some Ivy League white man, right? And they can only the ones that know the truth for some reason. But we know that's not true. What is the most innovative, visionary, to go back to what Maddox was asking us to do in the morning, dream work happen? Not at Harvard, right? It happens on the ground. It happens with Black women and brown women, right? And so if we're not acknowledging their genius, this is just another way we're invisibilizing and marginalizing the true vanguards of our society. And that needs to stop, right? And so we also need to really change our own kind of internal thinking and mental models on who are experts.
Yeah, it starts with respect. It's just respect. And it's a mutual respect, right? Because the foundation has been laid by these women, by these civil rights leaders, men and women. You know, there's an interplay between the feminine and the masculine as well. It's respect. It's basic respect. I also just want to add to this question too, and dig a little more deeply into the narratives that already exist, right? Not only the stereotypes and the things that are placed upon our communities, but the ways in which we internalize those narratives, right? And the interplay there is super, super important, because I strongly believe in programs like ours, where we are building community, we are giving the income, but we're also developing the social capital. Most of what we need most of the time is the freedom to do what we need to do, you know? And if that comes with acknowledgement publicly, great. If it comes with money, which we need to, give us money for our programs. All of the above, but we have what we need, right? And so when I talk about respect, it's respect for each other, you know, as advocates, as participants in this community of practice, but also broadly, because it starts here. It starts at the core, you know, when we're talking about guaranteed income. Let's look at each other, right? Let's look across the table, you know, at the Black women and also the Black men doing the work, and everything in between, right? So I think I want to elevate that, you know, in this conversation as we're thinking about the narratives and the pieces that need to change.
Okay, so there is a reticence often to name how sexism and racism are inherently tied to the work of guaranteed income and any social safety net program, really. And also, many organizations sanitize their materials of references to that when others, like Maven, will bring it up. I think that it would not be a stretch to say that that is why we, up until 24 hours ago, had 2 extremely old white men vying for the presidency. And how do we get people in the movement to see that this is where this movement will end up irrelevant, out of touch, if we don't get it together?
I'll start this time. This is great timing, the election cycle and all. Yeah, I think it's the principles. You know, what do we value? You know, I said respect several times, but do we value love? Do we value integrity, right? Do we value trust? Do we value honesty? All of those things are so important. This is a values-based, values-driven movement, you know, and every piece of that we have to embody. You know, we're talking about money, we're talking about the economics of it all. We know that the Black community has 10 times less wealth than the white community. We already know that the Black community has more education per capita across the nation, in many, many cities across the nation. We know that the pay gap, the gendered pay gap exists, right? With Black women earning 66 cents to a white man's dollar. We already know these things. Like, these are facts that are widely available, right? So that makes me ask, like, what is missing, you know? And that's where we get back to the principles that drive this conversation and also the principles that bring us together. Because from my conversations on the ground with Black women, from the history of Ruby Duncan and Johnny Tillman, they were fighting for their own children, but they were fighting for everyone's children, you know? And it's so important that these values are central, because that's what unites us. And that's how we start to drive this nation forward, you know? It's not helpful to me, and it's not helpful to other women like me when we are seen in isolation, because we're not, you know? This is so important for us to understand, I think, as we move forward and we have conversations about where to go next within this movement.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I have a couple things to add. So one, I think it's real important for us collectively to do some ego checking, right? Like, what is this about? What is the problem that we're actually trying to solve? Like, that's the question. What are we trying to do with guaranteed income, right? And if it is, and I hear from many folks in these spaces, it's about creating a better society. It's about creating equality. Then it's like asking the deep-rooted questions, well, how do we do that? What do we actually need to change? What are the root causes of inequities today? And that means acknowledging white privilege, it means acknowledging the patriarchy, and it means acknowledging that we have marginalized Black women in particular, and by extension brown women and others, because we believe in white supremacy and the patriarchy in our hearts. We've been sold, we've been conditioned that way, right? And so when you're in it, and you're fighting, and you aren't maybe a Black woman, why are you saying what you're saying? Maybe you need to check your ego at the door. Maybe it's time for you to listen so that we don't become irrelevant, right? So that we do stay connected to community. So this is just an offering for us to really think about, do I really need to say something right now? If the reporter is calling me, is it me that needs to be talking right now, or should I pass the mic?
Or if I'm at a conference for guaranteed income and I'm a white man, am I on my phone? Or am I listening to the people who are talking? I don't know. Zaya, anything you want to add?
Sure. I think one of the things that I think a lot about is the society that I want to live in, that we all want to live in. I think it's really expensive to live in the Bay Area, but one of the things I realized about the reason why we work so hard to live here is because it's lovely to be surrounded by a bunch of other folks who believe in letting other people live how they want to live and believe in everybody's thriving. I mean, I know that's not a universal principle here, but there's a lot of us who believe in that, and that's like a lovely thing. But we can't get there, I think, if we pretend like there aren't certain people who have very clear structural barriers set up against their thriving. And I think somebody who I idealize a lot, his name is Michael McAfee. He runs PolicyLink. And he once said to me, he said, "Zaya, all of the easy equity work has been done." And that was really hard to hear, actually, because in my fantasy, I just wanted to do what felt good, and then the world is going to get better. But in reality, we have some really hard political barriers that we're up against. And, undermining those is not going to be easy, but the solution is not to pretend. And so I think as we think about advancing guaranteed income work, it's really hard to do it in a way that acknowledges racism and sexism, because you're not only adding to the regular barriers that we have around addressing poverty in this country, but you're also addressing some really fundamental stuck points we have in America, namely exploiting women and exploiting folks of color, especially Black people. And so as we dream into our new future, we have to kind of be honest about where we're starting. Otherwise, we're not going to get to where we're going, that we want to be at. And so, how do we dream into this protopia? And I think it starts with us kind of recognizing that we no longer want to live in a heterosexist world. We no longer want to live in a world of white supremacy. And many of us are going to have to get uncomfortable in order to create that change. So how do you do your own work so that you can sit in the discomfort and be in solidarity around this larger vision where racism and sexism no longer determine who gets to thrive in our society?
Yes. So as we've alluded to, we are in a transitional, is maybe the most diplomatic way to put it, space in our national politics and also in this movement. I mean, we are dealing with these ongoing attacks against guaranteed income legislation all over the country. And one of the things that hasn't been acknowledged by that many people is the fact that these are also tied to the anti-Black efforts against things like the Fearless Fund, led by the same white man who overturned affirmative action at the Supreme Court. So what do we lose by not making those connections?
I mean, I think we're not getting to the heart of the matter, right? So it is not by coincidence that the programs that are being sued and attacked are the ones that are serving Black women. We have to say that and name that and acknowledge that, right? That is what's happening. And the efforts, particularly, I can speak on this, folks that are behind the effort to sue your wonderful program, one of the people had racist billboards when she was running for mayor against London Breed all around the city. She is flying her racist flag very loudly and clearly. Right? And so when it comes to giving Black women money, unrestricted cash, for them having power, we have a reaction. And I'm using we in the general. And that needs to be acknowledged in this moment, in this room, right? And that is why it is so essential that we center race and gender, that we talk about what is happening to Black women in this country right now. All the gains that have happened, it is being rolled back very intentionally. And if we are not standing in solidarity with these programs that are being attacked, what happens to this movement? Seriously, what happens to this movement? So we just sit there and they're like, not my program, I don't know. Or no, we should take a big tent approach. What happens to those program participants? What happens to those Black women? What happens to Abundant Birth Project? What happens to Magnolia's Mother's Trust? If we lose those programs, how good of a movement are we? What are we actually fucking doing?
Who wants to follow that?
Well, I can't say a whole lot because the Abundant Birth Project is getting sued. But what I can say is I want to kind of dream about what would happen if we won our lawsuit. How amazing would that be if we were to win and we were to acknowledge that it is okay to support the folks who need it the most disproportionately. Like,
And
if
we can win, by the way.
we can win.
We can
yeah.
win.
We haven't been enjoined yet, so it's not like for sure that we're going to lose. But I have to also say that it feels hella lonely right now, because for programs who are not getting sued, for programs who have chosen to take a race-neutral approach because they don't want to get sued, they don't want to touch us with a 10-foot pole. And I get it, but again, I think it brings up the question of, like, in the same way how we can dream about how amazing it would be if we win, what does it mean for all of us if we lose? I mean, really think about that for a minute. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're going to have to Google it, because I don't want to get us in legal trouble by giving deets. But, but like, how hard would it be if a decision is made where we can no longer acknowledge, for instance, that black women die in pregnancy at 4 times the rate of white women for no other reason than racism, but our hands are tied to do anything about it? Is that the country we want to live in? If not, then we need people to be in solidarity, even when it feels scary, even when it feels hard, because otherwise there's not really a future for equity work.
Yes. I'll tell you what happens. I'm going to follow that and tell you what happens if these lawsuits and these attacks go uncontested. Innovation stops. It comes to a crashing halt because as black women, as black innovators, as people in the community who are building things that influence and support everyone in our communities, if we can't get done what we need to get done, innovation stops. And that's, to me, the most terrifying aspect of guaranteed income and the work that we're doing. But not only that, but from a business standpoint, as a business owner, somebody who owns and manages a cooperative, right? We need money, we need the resources, and we need the energy to keep going. So when you talk about the Fearless Fund, we weren't able to be funded by the Fearless Fund. The launch of our program, the Black Women's Resilience Project, we can't seem to find money to do it, right? Much less public funding. So these are very real issues, and I look at the women in our community who are waiting, who have been waiting for a year, right, to start the project and to get their ideas off the ground, because it's about them. So if we don't recognize these attacks on these programs as what they are, attacks on all of us, Black women, our communities, but all of us in the movement, we lose out on the potential, everything that we're creating together.
Okay, so I'm going to try and power through these next 2 questions because we already got the sign. It came and went, I know. So it is a results time for a lot of pilots, a lot of the bigger pilots. And I think that all of us who work in the social safety net space know that $500 to $1,000 is not going to solve all of the many, many compounding problems that people are facing right now in a country that is just historically awful in terms of supports for people who are struggling. So how do those of us in the movement who are advocating for cash, how do we keep up that momentum in the wake of potentially muddy results?
One of the things that I do, I think, is I stay connected to the actual participants, not as like an observer, but really like, what does it look like to be in it? I have a direct practice. I'm a pediatrician. It's hard to run a guaranteed income program and try to take care of kids in a social safety net, but it also is really important to me because it gives me an opportunity to interact with the exact mamas that I do this work for on a weekly basis and be grounded in their reality, be reminded of the reality that I grew up in, so that this work is not about me, but it's about the impact that I want to have. And I think especially as a pediatrician, it's impossible to not feel the urgency as I see these kids growing up before my very eyes in real time. We have only 9 months ideally to make sure that a baby is born on time, healthy weight. 9 months goes by so fast, and so I feel an incredible urgency to make sure that any pregnant person who needs resources during this critical window has access. And so I think it's really important to stay grounded in the community. And when I say grounded, I mean not as a leader, as a PhD, as a physician, but as just somebody whose humanity connects with the humanity of the folks that we're doing this work on behalf of and alongside of. So I think staying grounded in the community is the best way to keep the momentum.
Do you want to add to that, or
Yeah, I can.
you can't do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, keeping the momentum. I need less symbolism. I need more action. That's the bottom line, right? You know, it's really nice to say it's really nice to say that we want equity, again, but what does it mean to actually be on the ground? What does it mean to look at your neighbor and say, I value your ideas, I value your input, and what can we create? And actually, here are the resources to do it. I will allow and accept and bring myself to this work, just as you do me, right? Those are the kinds of things that I see making a difference in my community and in the work that we're doing. And there are all these micro interactions that are so important, and you don't see it, you know, when you're 10 feet away, you know, and you're devising how to movement build or drafting a policy. So I think some of that momentum comes from, as Zaya mentioned, the day-to-day, because that stuff is what energizes us, it's what keeps us connected, and we are in a very, very trepidatious environment, right? So we need it, and we need to remember that in order to keep catalyzing this.
Okay, so just to close out, we're in this room full of brilliant, committed, passionate people. What is your one thought, ask, advice to them for how to help shape this movement as we look forward?
I mean, I think all three of us have said very specifically, don't forget Black women. Don't throw them to the side. If it makes you uncomfortable, sit with that uncomfortable feeling. Ask yourself, why do I feel uncomfortable when this brown woman is up here talking about centering Black women, when she's saying that she is not free until Black women are free, and that makes me feel a certain way? Why? Why does it make you feel a certain way? Why do you hesitate to talk about race and gender? And it's a real question. I'm not shaming you for it, but what I'm asking you to do is be courageous, be visionary, sit with it, and try to move past it and embrace it, right? I used to be a teacher, and one of the things I used to tell my young people is, like, you're not learning unless you're uncomfortable, right? If you're doing things that you know how to do, you're not in a learning space, right? So, yeah, we probably said some things that made you feel uncomfortable. That's a good thing. That means you're in a learning space. So stay there and move with it. Listen, like really listen. You don't have all the answers, maybe. Maybe you don't. Just sit with that. And again, I want to say this over and over again. If we do not specifically place Black women, brown women at the center of our discussions, they will be ignored. We will get ignored. It has happened time and time again, and you cannot tell me that it won't happen again, that we've invented a new wheel. We have not. So unless we change how we connect with people and how we see people and bring other folks, and again, see our humanity through other people that don't look like us, we're not doing anything. We're just spinning, and we can't spin anymore.
Ask more questions. Ask more questions. Be curious and be genuine. You know, don't ask the gotcha questions, right? Actually ask questions because you want to question your beliefs. Ask questions because you're serious about unpacking those patterns, because by default, we will follow the same patterns, you know, that this country has laid, right? So if we're not intentional, we have to be intentional.
Last words,
I
Zaya.
promise I'm going to go so fast.
No pressure.
Okay, but I have two. I think the first one is when folks are doing strategic planning on a big level or a small level, to assess risk honestly, to really think about, you know, if we do not take this action towards equity, who is going to face the consequences? Versus if we take this, what is the actual risk that I'm facing? Because I think it's really easy to be like, oh, I'm going to lose my job, or get really like catastrophizing, whatever that word is, to get really, excessive about how terrible the risk could be, and it's really easy to underestimate the consequences of not actually stepping into equity work. So to really get honest with your risk assessments when you're doing strategic planning. And then I have been on a love journey for the last few months as a way to save myself, because it's been really emotionally and spiritually exhausting to be part of the Abundant Birth Project recently, but it's important work. And so I've had to figure out, how do you stay in the work when it's so hard? And I think that what is missing from a lot of movement work is gentleness, because we have to fight so often. We have to fight our bosses. We have to fight the system. We have to fight politicians. We have to fight the narrative. So much fighting, sometimes even fighting in our own communities. But that fighting in our own communities, it has a particular toll. But I think that we're so defaulted into fighting that we forget to be gentle with one another. And so I just really want to remind us, how can we continue to bring gentleness towards ourselves, towards the work, towards our community, even towards our politicians, because it's not easy work. And they may not get it right, but it's also really hard. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to apply pressure, feel strongly, but is there a way that we can do it while also honoring one another's humanity and the gentleness that all of our humanity deserves? So that's my ask.
I think that is an excellent place to leave it. Sorry, Stacy, for going over, but I think it was well worth it. And thank you all. Hope you have a great time at the conference.